The Dallas Cowboys have made a massive move at the quarterback position. We'll break it down next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And on today's show, we're going to talk about three players that we went back and reevaluated their film as we kind of get closer to the NFL draft. We'll do that in segment 3. But first of all, we need to talk about this big move that the Cowboys made on Thursday, acquiring Joe Milton from the New England Patriots. It's not out of nowhere, because we actually talked about this, was it last week, about how the Cowboys could be making a move for a backup quarterback, and Milton was the name that we threw around. But now that it's happened, Landon, what are your thoughts?
I love it. Just simply because it's a low cost, investment on a guy that, probably is, if you're going to stack all the quarterbacks, including, who's available for this sort of trade and the, available draftable quarterbacks coming out in this class, I would probably put Joe Milton, a stack above all the other guys that I could get at, with a 5th round pick. That's for sure. And considering the fact that it wasn't even a 5th round pick, it was ultimately a pick swap, right? Like, between their 7th, the Cowboys 5th and the New England Patriots 7th. So you drop back about, I think was 75 picks.
No, not even. It's 46 spots they dropped.
46 picks. Wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, you drop back just over a round, right? A round and a half. You basically get a guy who, has a lot of athletic upside. He had an incredible game against the Buffalo in week 18 in a meaningless kind of game, but still, really highly graded, really well. I mean, if you go and watch the game, there's a lot in that that you see him do that's exciting. It's worth watching. But this is a guy, that if you don't remember him coming out of University of Tennessee, he was originally a recruit at Michigan, a very highly recruited quarterback. He transfers to Tennessee, and if anybody knows anything about the University of Tennessee, is that they have a very bizarre offense, and it's an offense that it's hard to evaluate players out of, especially quarterbacks, because of the nature of the way that the offense is designed. It certainly is not a 1-for-1 translation to the NFL. It's probably the most college, wacko offense you'll see. Think, Baylor in the early 2010s is like, that's kind of the kind of offense we're talking about, right? Art Briles type thing. So so it was a very tough evaluation for him coming out because of the offense. He clearly has incredible traits. Like, he's big, and by big I mean he's enormously big. He's 6'5 plus, 240 pounds. I don't remember what his athletic testing was off the top of my head, but I mean, you could tell on tape that the guy.
I got it.
Yeah,
it's 6'5 and a quarter, 235, 80-inch wingspan. Not that wingspan matters for a quarterback.
That's crazy.
There you go. 10 and a quarter inch hands, so big hands, 35-inch vertical, a 121 broad. He didn't run the 40 at the NFL Combine, but the numbers that we had, like springtime numbers, were like 4.49, 4.51.
Yeah, he looks like a 4.5 athlete, right? And he just looks enormous, right? Like he's just like you just laid it out. It's not just that he's 6'5", but his hands, his arm, his width is he's huge. Wingspan is the word I was looking for. Sorry. And so he's just a very big human being who moves very well. Now, the aspects of quarterbacking is obviously where we have some of the issues, right? He has kind of inconsistent accuracy. I think it stems from a lack of consistency in his footwork and mechanics in general. I do think that, the difference in, and I'm not just talking about the stats, the difference in what you saw on tape at Tennessee versus what you saw on tape in Week 18 in New England was improvement and some pretty serious improvement. And again, I understand all the context. It's a meaningless Week 18 game. Buffalo was already in the playoffs. New England was already out of the playoffs. Nobody was really trying to win anything. But even then, like you just physically watch what he's able to do. He's able to navigate a pocket. He's able to buy himself time, and he was able to get throws off even while being hit. He's kind of seemingly shortened his delivery, so he's getting the ball off a little bit quicker than what you saw at Tennessee. I just see look, it's easy to kind of write off this a small sample size and basically a preseason game being played in the regular season, but I think if you actually put on the tape and watch him, there are a lot of things about this guy that really make you excited about being able to kind of develop with him.
Yeah, and he doesn't cost them anything. I'm looking at the money right now. So it's 3 years with a total of $3.05 million is what Dallas is going to be paying him.
It's great.
I mean, you can't get a quarterback in free agency under less than that, right? Like, I think if the Cowboys were to sign a vet minimum quarterback, let's say it's like a Joe Flacco type, I believe his vet minimum would be like $2.8 million for 1 year. You're paying Milton basically that over 3 years, right? So not that you're trying to save money here, but you're also paying nothing on the salary cap, which is really nice when you're paying another quarterback $60 million on your roster. It feels like they're going to go into the season with Dak, Will Grier, and Joe Milton. And I would have to assume that Grier is probably going to be the primary backup, right? With Milton being the third quarterback but I don't think that's set in stone though either.
Yeah. I would imagine that they go in and have a competition to just see how, Milton takes to the offense. And that Grier kind of represents the floor, right? For that backup quarterback situation. To your point, it's not about just going cheap, right? It's about getting even if you went the other route and you paid a little bit more to go get the veteran quarterback, you wouldn't get any upside, right? Like there's no upside to Joe Flacco. His upside's already gone, right? With Milton, you bring him in, you've got him under contract control for 3 years, right? It's cheap. And if he isn't the guy that comes in if Dak gets hurt in a game or something, frankly, no loss. This isn't the same as the Trey Lance deal, right? You didn't trade a 4th round pick for this. You traded basically the equivalent of a 6th round pick for this, probably.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think it's a low cost option, tons of upside there. If it doesn't work out, it's you've insured yourself with Will Grier, and by not paying a lot of money, that it's okay to kind of let this whole situation go. But this is an upside play.
So we knew that Dallas was interested in drafting a quarterback in this year's class, and they've got a bunch of day 3 picks. So it's not entirely impossible that they could spend one more, although I kind of doubt it. But my thing is with them, they have a 3rd round pick, which I don't think they were ever going to spend a 3rd round pick on a quarterback. I just don't.
Yeah.
And then they had their next pick was in the 5th round. The quarterback difference between the 3rd and 5th, I think, would have been pretty massive. If you're looking at the consensus board now, here are like the quarterbacks that are expected to be available when they're on the clock in the 5th round. It's Dylan Gabriel, Brady Cook, who is the quarterback responsible for tanking Luther Burden's draft value at Missouri. There's Curtis Rourke. There's Riley Leonard, Graham Mertz, who bounced around like nothing. Like there's nothing going to be available. And even someone like Dylan Gabriel, who we like quite a bit, I wouldn't be shocked if he goes undrafted because he's like a 5'10" quarterback with not a lot of arm strength. You just were never going to get a quarterback on day 3 that had anywhere near the talent and upside as Joe Milton. That's why it's really hard to be upset about it.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe it would be possible, but it would be such a needle to thread. It's like,
it's not worth the risk.
Yeah. It's not worth the risk. And it'd be such a gamble to like hope that, one of these guys who are probably going to go top 90 at the end of the day, honestly.
Yeah, like who is even the guy that you're drafting that
who are you hoping? Who are you even hoping?
That's the thing. Who are you hoping for? Is it I'll give you an example. I like Will Howard quite a bit. Like I think he's maybe better than what the consensus says. Will Howard doesn't have anywhere near the upside that Joe Milton has, right? Like if you ask me to pick between them, I'd just take Milton as a backup because the ceiling's so much higher. And that's what you're hoping falls to you in round 5. Hoping.
Yeah, and I think this way you get exactly what you know exactly what you're getting. I just think you have better control over the situation, and you still get the all the upside of it being a draft pick. The only difference is that you're down 1 year, right? Your
Yes.
contract is one less year. Other than that, like I
You
mean,
have
this makes a
3
ton of
years
sense.
though. That's
Yeah,
that's for that's an
that's a lot.
eternity in the
Yeah,
NFL, you know?
absolutely, for
Yeah.
sure.
All right, let's talk about how Joe Milton is going to fit with Dak Prescott, with Brian Schottenheimer, and the rest of the offense. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person. But getting tickets shouldn't be stressful. But that's where Game Time comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last minute seats at unbeatable prices. Game Time Picks makes it easier to buy or to find better value to sporting events, just concerts, to comedy and theater events near you. I was looking at the Game Time app yesterday morning for an event that my wife and I are going to go to on Saturday. Game Time made it so easy to find the exact deal that we were looking for. Plus, they have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And with seat views before you buy, no surprise fees, and a lowest price guarantee, you can book with total confidence. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That is Locked On NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Lena, let's talk about the fit, because
Mhm.
not Dak, Joe Milton couldn't be any different than Cooper Rush, who was the backup last year. In a lot of ways, Dak couldn't be any different than Joe Milton. So how does Joe Milton fit here?
Yeah, I mean, just the kind of quarterback he is. I mean, he's one of these very typical kind of athletic upside quarterbacks, right? Where you see him out there as moving very extremely well as an athlete, and then when it comes to throwing the football, there's inconsistency, right? Like this, it's just that's what you usually are getting with these kind of dual threat developmental guys, right? Is that the top of the guys that are going in the first round, they've got it both. They can throw the football with touch, with accuracy. They can run like a gazelle. The Lamar Jacksons of the world is what we're talking about, right? The kind of lesser, and Cam Newton, right? Cam Newton is another example of a big body guy who has athleticism, could run the football, could run through you, could also throw the football through you, and but also deliver the ball with some touch, right? This, if you slide a little bit further down that scale, right, like a little bit further back on the talent scale from those guys, and you see Joe Milton there, right? Big guy, he knows how to use his body, knows how to use his athleticism. We talked about the kind of fluky offense that they had in Tennessee. I think where the big difference is that he has between Dak and specifically Cooper Rush is, I think you could use him more as I think that there's an opportunity to use him as a goal line coded option, right? If you wanted to develop a package where he comes in at the goal line and you run maybe some zone read stuff, or you do some QB sneak stuff, he's a big body, he's strong, right? And I think that there's an element of that if you wanted to do some of that. When he's in the game, if Dak is out or injured or whatever, I imagine that the offense is probably going to want to run more RPOs, right? Like designed kind of simple read stuff. I think the issue that we've seen with Milton in the past is, like we mentioned before, mechanics, which it turns into accuracy issues, and then I think reading defenses and getting through progressions is something that he's just not had to do a lot of because of like I said, the offense that he had in Tennessee. So I think if you're going to have him in the game, it's going to, Dak is famous for being able to read a defense and read his progressions back and forth multiple times during a snap, right? I think if you're going to put Milton in the game, you want to simplify some of the reads. You want to give him very easy choices and allow him to deliver the ball quickly to people to create plays that way. And then, you also can leverage the aspect that he has that Dak doesn't have as much, right, is in his legs, right? I think he can really be valuable, short yardage, even on first and second down, you run a zone read. It just gives the defense something else to prepare for. So you just have to find a way to kind of use what Joe Milton does well and kind of, get your offense working like that. And I think you can do that with all the pieces that you have in this offense already. It's just about calling a different sequence of plays when Joe Milton's in there versus Dak.
One of the other things I'm going to be interested in seeing is, does Joe Milton get any playing time with a healthy Dak? Now,
Yeah.
what I mean by that is, could he be the guy that's running like the third and fourth down quarterback sneaks, maybe just to take some of the wear and tear off of Dak? The reason they didn't do that with Trey Lance is because Trey Lance was never the backup quarterback. He was always the third emergency quarterback. So somebody would have been ruled out for Lance to get on the field. That won't be, we think that won't be the case with Milton. I got to believe that eventually he's going to beat out Will Grier for this backup job. And maybe Brian Schottenheimer would be more willing to use Joe Milton in those kind of situations to, again, keep the wear and tear on Dak. I was also thinking today, like, maybe we see Joe Milton on like halftime situations or at the end of the fourth quarter. You need a Hail Mary. He just has a much better arm than what Dak does, and he's much more mobile. So if you need a quarterback that can scramble around for a little bit and then launch the ball 75 yards in the air and have it like look like a punt, Joe Milton can do that for you.
Yeah, and again, like I mentioned before, goal line situations, some short yardage situations, just situations where you're not even necessarily, having to throw the football, but just having him to be another body to account for in the run game for the defense, running zone reads, giving you the numbers advantage to your run game at the goal line, right? This, one thing you saw him do a lot that was really nice to see is that, take the zone read and then just get upfield quickly and use his big body to lean into defenders, driving them across the goal line. So I think like that.
I know Trey Lance is a really good athlete, but he just feels so much bigger and more athletic than what Lance was.
Oh, he's so much bigger. I mean, I don't remember what Trey Lance's size was. But I mean, this guy is legitimately, I mean, he may be listed 235 on, the combine numbers. This guy is legitimately 240.
Yeah. So plus. Lance was 6'3.5", 224, with 9-inch hands.
So this guy's 2 inches and 20 pounds basically heavier than Lance, right? Like, I mean, so and that matters, right? And I think that Trey Lance is more of a elusive, fast, player. Not that Tom. I mean, obviously Milton is fast, but I mean that's more of a kind of straight line thing. I think if you're looking for a running style, I would look more towards Cam Newton. Not that he is Cam Newton, but that's more of the running style that you're getting from him as a quarterback, a power runner more than a run away from you kind of runner. Josh Allen, I mean, it's unfair to compare him to anybody, but I think as far as a body type running the football, that's a fair comparison as far as like what you should expect he can do. So I think it just, if you get him into the game, you're going to want to find ways to leverage more of his legs than you would with Dak. Because he's not as good a passer as Dak is, and he's, he is a better runner than Dak is. So I think that is just a kind of way to slightly change the angles on your offense a little bit, and it can really probably put defenses in a loop, especially in game.
The odds of Joe Milton ever becoming a good NFL player are probably pretty low. But the Cowboys paid almost nothing to get him. A late day 3 pick swap is about the least that you can give up in any kind of trade. You're paying him $1 million for each of the next 3 seasons. It's worth taking a risk on somebody that has this much talent. Again, you mentioned the Bills game. Buffalo had a bunch of backups in the game. Yeah. I understand. But some of the throws he was making and the velocity of which he was making those throws is what's so appealing here. And it's why he's going to continue to get chance after chance after chance, because there's only 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the league that can make that one throw that he made where he's like falling out of bounds and he throws it across his body.
The touchdown, where he threw it across his body.
It's like a 35-yard frozen rope right to the pylon. Like, it's unbelievable.
It's the classic no yes play, and it's only a few human beings on the planet can do those sort of things, right? And I think you're right to point out this backups, all of that matters, right? But that doesn't change the fact that I watched him navigate a hurried pocket, find a way to buy time, break out of it multiple times to create on his own and then complete a play. A couple of them for touchdowns. So yeah, there are aspects of this that you see that like you're like, listen, maybe he won't be a starting quarterback in the NFL, but I'm seeing things that I think that at least give him a chance that he could be someday.
Yeah, the last thing before we move on, there are a lot of bad backup quarterbacks in the league. So if he's a bad backup, he's with almost every other team. But in a league with so many bad backup quarterbacks like Skylar Thompson, John Wolford, Carter Bradley, Taylor Heineke, Tanner McKee, we keep going, Brett Rippon, Jake Kaner, Michael Pratt. At least he's fun and exciting. If your backup quarterback's in the game, you're probably not winning anyways. At least have someone who's fun with some upside.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about some actual stuff that's probably going to matter for the Cowboys. And let's talk about 3 players who we were in on early that maybe we need to reevaluate a little bit. We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day, and find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. So one of my favorite things that you do, Landon, is that there'll be a couple times where I'll get a message at like 1 a.m. my time, and I'll wake up and like one of my kids is crying or whatever, and I'll see this random notes that I get in my DMs. And you had some really interesting notes on 3 first-round caliber players that we were in on early that maybe we need to kind of reevaluate.
So this is something that I had been planning to do for a little while, and actually what the impetus of it was I was watching Will Johnson, kind of evaluating him for the first time. Really, I mean, I've obviously watched him and seen games of him, but like actually kind of sitting down to finally put him into the list, right? And at a certain point, I knew that I had to go back to the 2023 tape because that's all that anybody ever talks about with Will Johnson is that his 2023 tape is unbelievable. You got to go see it, right? And it just reminded me of 2 other guys too that I think fall under this category where I think they're being, fairly maligned. I think it's not unfairly maligned, but they're being maligned because of their 2024 play and the expectations that were put against the 2024 play, right? Because to me, and the 3 guys I'm going to mention here are Will Johnson, who obviously I was talking about originally, Michael Williams from the defensive end from Georgia, and Luther Burden, wide receiver from Missouri. I think these are 3 guys who, coming into the 2024 season, were considered 3 of the best players in college football, had huge expectations on them, and didn't necessarily, obviously, live up to them, right? And so I think it's fair, and I think there's often times where we see these guys and we kind of write them off, and then they get into the NFL, and it's like, oh, that guy, it was just a bad year that he had. And like, oh, he really is a good player. I think specifically Derek Stingley is the guy that kind of comes to mind where, and really, I mean, you could make the argument Micah Parsons is that guy too, right? I mean, just completely took a year off. And that was something that was constantly being talked about in his evaluation and his valuation of where he should be drafted, that sort of thing, right? So I thought, knowing that those guys hit and that those are things that we should be kind of checking back on, I went back and watched Will Johnson's 2023 tape, Williams and Burden, and I think I ended up moving all 3 of them just slightly based on the tape, because I do think that there is circumstance that can have an influence on your year to year tape. I think that's something itself that should be valued, right? Sure. Like, okay, maybe he doesn't always have year to year consistency. Maybe he is more of a victim of a situation than you would prefer. But I think for someone like Will Johnson, like, you go back and watch that 2023 tape, and he's dealing with injuries, dealing with, kind of a lack of talent in Michigan, obviously. And obviously you're going to knock them for maybe not playing at the level that you want, just like you did with Stingley. But just like you did with Stingley, I think it's important to also recognize, hey, this guy had 2 or 3 incredible years of college football and had one not so great year. and we seemingly are only evaluating him on his not so great year. And I think the other aspect of this that I just want to throw out before we kind of open the conversation up is expectations. I think that's really where these three players kind of got hurt in this 2024 season, is because they played so well early on in their careers. Williams and Johnson were, and I think Burden too, were all three All-Americans before they were juniors, right? And for them to kind of come into their last year and be just not quite absolute superstars the way you expected them to, I think is not necessarily bad tape. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, I think these guys played well in 2024, for most of 2024, but got knocked because simply it wasn't as good as their tape in 2023.
Yeah, I want to just talk about Michael Williams really quickly, because Michael, first of all, you're right. There have been several players over the last couple of years who have coasted a little bit after a really strong year. Like, I remember Willie Anderson. I think he had 35 tackles for a loss his sophomore year, and then it went down to 17. Just wasn't quite the same player. Still was in the third pick of the draft and one of the best players.
Still is a great NFL player, right?
Jackson Smith-Njigba had 1,600 yards as a sophomore, and I think played 3 games his next year. And he could have came back for the playoffs, but decided, yeah, he's good. So this does happen. But Michael Williams is somebody, he got hurt in week 1 against Clemson, and then he played a total of, I'm looking at it now, 40 snaps for over the next 6 games. Okay. So he was banged up.
Legitimately.
Yeah. And then played all the way through the college football playoffs and got better as the season went on, but you could still see he wasn't healthy. And I keep coming back to this with Michael. Like, I understand the college production isn't there, but if you remove Abdul Carter from your brain for a second, which defensive end in this class is the best pairing with Micah Parsons? Because I don't think I like Mike Green a lot, but I don't know if that's the type of long guy you want playing opposite him to stop the run. I don't think it's James Pierce. I don't think it's Jalen Walker. I kind of think it might be Michael, because he's so good against the run. He knows how to use his length. He's 20. Everybody at Georgia raves about him.
Yeah.
And we're just down on him a little bit because he didn't have the production that last year because he was so freaking banged up.
And this kind of gets to some of the psychology and diving into our own brains as evaluators, right? I think part of the other thing that gets brought up here, there, or at least when I think about it, is that when I watch Shamar Stewart, I think that my opinion of Michael Williams from the beginning, really, it seems like, has always been in relation to other things, right?
It's always in relation to Shamar Stewart for me, always.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And so it's always like, why is Shamar Stewart rated lower than Michael Williams? It's like I'm almost started out my evaluation with Michael Williams being contrarian that he isn't as good as Shamar Stewart, instead of just evaluating Michael Williams as who he is, right? I personally would take Stewart over Williams, right? Because I think that there's upside there that I'm willing to bet on. But I think that doesn't mean that I need to be comparing Michael Williams to Shamar Stewart constantly. I think Michael Williams, in his own right, has his own different type of athleticism. It's not Shamar Stewart's out of the world athleticism, but for a 260 plus pound 6'5" guy that is a power end, I think it's very, very solid. You see it on tape. And to answer your question,
well, by the way, he also ran a 1.6 10-yard, still on a bad ankle at his pro day. 1.6 is like what Michael Parsons ran at 240 pounds.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's got it. Like, you see it on tape. Look, I mean, anyone who's like, you definitely see athleticism. Like, there's no question about that. It's just kind of unique, and we would have liked measurements on it. But to answer the question, absolutely. This is the type of body that you want opposite Micah Parsons, and especially in a Flus defense specifically, because he loves those bigger defensive ends. So, I think we spent a lot of time early on in this conversation with him, only talking about him in comparison to how much we like Shamar Stewart. I think going back into 2023 reminded me, man, this guy's an incredible player on his own. He had a really rough year, but that's not necessarily who he is.
Yeah. And I was listening to the Todd McShay podcast this morning, and he was saying, he said, you talk to the people at Georgia, like, they absolutely love him. They love how he practiced every single day, despite having a massive foot injury. They said he's just a professional, and he's 20 years old, and he's acting like he's been, around for a long time. There's part of me that that's just very appealing, like getting a guy like that.
Yeah.
And you're betting on, if he, at age 21, if he's fully healthy, he's going to look completely different. He doesn't turn 21 until I think it's early July.
Yeah.
It's a really young player.
Yeah, very young, very versatile, very athletic. I think kind of has been unfairly marked in the draft process because of a lot of things are out of his control. And again, once again, we should not be punishing players who play through injury, right?
Yes.
Like, I think it's important to recognize when players are playing through injury and then grade their tape appropriately.
I agree. All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube, download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on X at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.